Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evalu8, Riverside Insight's first ever clinical conference. If you have joined us for any of our previous sessions, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We have had a great week of sessions and really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us for some fabulous professional learning. My name is Sarah Holman, and I'm the Clinical Product Marketing Director here at Riverside Insights. I'd like to personally thank you for joining us for our first session of Day 4, a student-centered approach to social emotional learning. For this session, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Byron McClure. Dr. McClure is a national certified school psychologist and founder of Lessons for SEL, where he uses researched, human-centered design thinking to build empathy, ideate, co-create solutions, and design equitable resources that put the needs of children front and center. He formerly served as the Assistant Director of School Redesign at a high school in Southeast DC, where he was responsible for leading and reimagining what social emotional learning looked like within an inner city community. During the presentation, please leave any questions you may have in the Q&A box. Handouts can be found in the Handouts tab on your GoToWebinar control panel. A recording of today's presentation and certificate of attendance will be sent to all registrants by the end of next week. And now I will pass it off to Dr. McClure to get us started.
Thank you so much for passing it over to me. I am thrilled to be here with you all in this moment. We have so many amazing things to talk about. I want this to be as engaging as possible. And my hope is that you can at least take away one thing that can help you feel energized, that can help you feel inspired. Most importantly, that you can begin doing in your school, in your district, or maybe even in your personal lives. So I am Byron McClure. I currently serve as the Director of Innovation for a company called 7 Mindsets. Prior to joining the team at 7 Mindsets, I was a school psychologist for a little over a decade, and then went on to redesign a high school in Southeast DC for 2 years, which was sensational work. I want to share just from my perspective, my experience as a psychologist, as someone who worked to redesign and really transform a high school, really from a systemic level, just some of the things that I've seen, that I've experienced, some things that I view as promising in the space of education. So I'm hoping that we have a great discussion today. And if possible, please join us again tomorrow, where we're going to have more of a discussion. I'll be answering some of the questions about some of the things that were discussed today. At the top of my screen, you can see a QR code. If you use your camera, open up your camera on your phone, you can look at this QR code and download the slides, or the organizers of this amazing event have made it super helpful and put the handouts inside of this platform as well, so you can access it either one of those ways. So I wanted to share just a little bit more about me and why this work is near and dear to my heart. And if you can see, we have an image on my left, an image on my right. And fun fact about me, I have an identical twin brother. My name is Byron. My twin's name is Brian. Bonus points if you can guess which is which. And to be honest, I know the one on the right, on the image on the right, I honestly would have to look at my mom has this picture. I would have to look on the back of the picture to be able to tell which is which. We look so much alike in these pictures. But I wanted to share this picture to really kind of highlight why this work is near and dear to me. In this picture, I was about 6 years old, and my family and we had moved to the Washington, D.C. area when I was about 2.5, 3. My father was a minister at the time. He's still a minister now. I'm in the Maryland area. But my father moved my family and I up. I have 3 older brothers, my mom. We all moved up to the DC area so that my father could continue and really, extend his ministry in DC. And the church where my father was a minister is located in Southeast DC. And one of the reasons why my father went to Southeast DC is he believed deeply in going where there was a need, to be of service and to bring value to people in the community. And years later, where I've had the opportunity to go through school, when I began working, I also had an opportunity to return back after graduate school and traveling to come back to DC and work in a community that is still in such need. Just so many societal ills, poverty, high rates of crimes. We're going to talk about all of those things, but this work is near and dear to me because my family literally moved here. My father has been in this work, and I'm continuing in this work to uplift a community that has been downtrodden for so long. Ironically enough, my twin also is doing very similar work, but on the policy side, as he was the policy of the Council of Racial Equity for DC as well. So the work in the city of DC is near and dear to my entire family. And so I would love if there was anyone who was able to guess the right twin. I love quotes, and I wanted to share this quote with you all to kind of frame our discussion and conversation for today. And this quote is by Charles Eames, and it says, recognizing the need is the primary condition for design. And you might be thinking, what is design? What is this conversation? What does this discussion have to do with design? And we're going to get into all things design, human-centered design, student-centered design, all of it. And it's going to blow your mind. I can't wait. One of the more important things that I want you to walk away with from this conversation is really two things: recognizing a need and then responding to a need. And I love this quote because it begins with recognizing what are we noticing? What are we reflecting on? What are we understanding to be a need? Then when you can understand and see that need, you respond to it and you design around it. Why? To meet the needs of people. So hold on to this quote as we move throughout the remainder of our discussion for today. I also want to put forth a question for you to think deeply about. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, from your experience, do you believe that every student deserves access to a quality education? Do you believe that? Do you see that as a fundamental tenet of education? Another fundamental question: do you believe that every student has access to the right opportunities to help them succeed? Do some students lack access? Are they denied access? Just things to think about. And one more fundamental question for you. Would you agree that every student deserves to feel loved, challenged, and prepared as they matriculate through the education system? And I will argue that for the most part, most educators, teachers, people who are working with young people believe that students deserve to feel loved, to feel challenged, to be prepared, that they want our young people to have access to get the opportunities that can help them be successful. But if we believe that, then we have to have an honest conversation. We have to look at why are inequities pervasive in the field of education. And not only in education, but across sectors, across industries, in healthcare, in government, across all these different industries, certain disparities and disproportionality continues to exist almost no matter what happens or what goes into place. So we must ask ourselves, if we believe these things, why do inequities continue to persist in education? When we look at this from analyzing the problem, I believe that the problem in education is persistent and systemic inequities along racial and socioeconomic lines, that they've remained, that they've been pervasive, and despite all these different trends, different things happening in education, these problems continue to persist. And I believe that those are by design. Now, when we look at design, I view design as something that was set up a certain way to get certain outcomes. And I believe that in the context of education, that our American education system was designed to benefit some and not to benefit others. And we see that persistently through the data, through metrics, through outcomes, and even through qualitative things, through surveys, and just through people's experiences as well. And when we look at this inequity that has been pervasive in schools, we have to look at how this is showing up in schools. And I believe that to really understand how it's currently showing up, we have to be able to look at this from a historical context. And when we consider the historical context, we have to understand that things such as racial discrimination, all of these things, lack of access to food, to adequate health care, uh, getting proper mental health care, we have to understand how policies and practices have shaped our very nation, and how these inequitable practices and policies have shaped the education system. When we understand that historical context, then we can see that those disadvantaged communities often have disadvantaged schools. And that's just the school, and we'll talk about this here shortly, like where I work. And what we see in those schools that are often disadvantaged in high poverty communities, and even rural areas, not just inner city, right? We see that those students have unmet needs across the board, whether we're talking about mental health, whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about quality instruction, whether we're talking about a sense of belonging, which is super important, and I don't think gets enough attention as well. And because of this, I believe that it leads to conflict that often goes unresolved. And because of this conflict, we see it from student to student, staff to staff, staff to student, even school to parent in these communities. And when there's so much harm that is left unrepaired and unaddressed, how does that show up? It shows up through over identification, a ridiculous amount of disproportionate referrals, students being referred for suspensions, for expulsions, even we know the trends where students are disproportionately referred and placed outside of school and referred to special education. Like, these are stats that we know have been pervasive for so long. And in extreme cases, way too often, we see that students from disadvantaged backgrounds are often excluded from the school community as well. And so traditionally, that's how we're seeing inequity and disproportionality showing up inside of schools. You might be saying, okay, we understand that inequity has been pervasive in education, but what does that look like now in present day? Well, it's still an issue. If you recall, back in 2018, our nation, the Fed said, hey, we're going to come up with this ESSA rating where every school across the country has to rate themselves. In DC, came out with the star rating system. I know it's reaped in deficit ideology of what's wrong. And we already know that schools and communities such as what I described oftentimes are going to be rated poorly across these indicators and metrics, really just based off of their zip code alone. And without fail, what we saw based on these star ratings, there were 8 schools that were identified as needing comprehensive support because they were failing in the lowest 5% of academic achievement based on standardized state testing, academic scores, truancy, attendance as well. And then out of those 8 schools, the chancellor, executive leadership, with approval from the mayor, they looked at, okay, out of those 8 schools, what 2 schools are at the very bottom? And those 2 schools was a school called Ballou High School and Anacostia High School, which is where I work in Southeast DC. And those final 2 schools were selected for what's called redesign. The thought process was that these schools would be radically redesigned and transformed and given an opportunity to completely change how education happens in those 2 schools. Now, Redesign is important because if you recall from some of our earlier slides, when we talk about redesign, now I want us to think on a larger scale. Our belief as we were going about redesigning was understanding that for transformation to happen, for something different to happen, to actually make a difference, then we have to address that historical context, right? We had to address and understand the pervasive outcomes and why that was. And we believe that systemically, these systems, practices, and policies were a direct result of the powers that be creating this system that was designed to perpetuate certain outcomes, to benefit some, not to benefit all, to provide certain opportunities and access to some, but not to every student. So with that belief in mind, we said that in order to disrupt that, then we have to redesign those antiquated systems and redesign it to perpetuate positive outcomes, to design it in such a way where we can uplift those who historically have been marginalized and didn't have a voice and give them a voice. So redesign, it was a school transformation strategy that put people front and center. It put students into the conversation and empowered our young people to actually have a voice in decisions that were made. In this new school model, a very important thing to note is that it was responsive to the needs of people and ever evolving. Importantly, it was grounded in equity. As we talked about before, we know the trends, we know the data, we understand how inequity shows up inside of our schools. And because of that, this redesign model is grounded in equity because it centers the needs of that school community and climate. It lifts up the interests and assets of people and views people as the most valuable assets and resources. And it also gave a strategic runway for engagement, design, and for planning. And it also brought in the voices of people closest to the ground so that we could understand what their unique needs are. We'll talk about that here shortly. You might be saying, okay, but why? Why redesign those two schools? Well, I just wanted to pull in this stat so that you can see and actually get a visual for what was happening inside of these two schools that were elected to be redesigned. And at the top of the screen, you'll see Anacostia, which was the school where I worked. And then at the bottom, Evalu8 High School. And we see that the school was predominantly African American and 1% Hispanic, very similar demographics at Evalu8 High School as well. Our enrollment on paper, we had close to 300 students, but you go back and you look year over year, at one point, even going back before the 2016 school year, we were approaching 1,000 students, right? But because of this downward trajectory of our enrollment, lack of access, lack of resources, violence, our enrollment dropped year after year after year to where there's only 300 students on paper. And then when you consider we had the highest truancy, highest academic score, or lowest academic scores, and all these things, then what looks like 300 kids on paper, if our attendance was 40%, 50%, 60%, you're having a fraction of those kids actually in the building on any given day. So there were a lot of needs, significant needs. 83% of our young people considered at risk, 100% economically disadvantaged as well. And so because of these needs, and we also have our ELA and PARCC scores, which were, basically last, right, across every category, worse than the district. And because of these needs, it was, hey, we are going to radically redesign this school. And we also had to consider the historical context. And in this community, along with the poor academic achievement, we saw housing instability, ridiculously high rates of gun violence that impacted our young people, their families, and their community, high rates of homelessness, and like all these things. But I don't want to continue to belabor this. It was a school that needed something drastic to happen right away for our young people. To be clear, we believe that as a result of these inequitable systems, we had to redesign them to create a system that was favorable, that could actually move the needle and begin producing favorable outcomes for our young people. And in this approach, we adopted this human-centered design. And my work was focused on students. And so drilling down, it was the student-centered design approach to the work. I would love if you all could just put in the chat. I'm not sure if you all have access to the chat, but if you do, if you've heard of this human-centered design approach, please just put yes in the chat. Not a lot of people in education have heard of it. I did a session last week, and there was one person who actually had done some really neat things in her district in Boston around human-centered design work. But I love this quote because it really kind of captures what human-centered design is. And it says it's a philosophy, not a precise set of methods, but one that assumes that innovation should start by getting close to users and observing their activities. Now, what this means is that it's not this complex philosophical way of going about things. No, but what it does is it looks at how can we innovate based on the needs of people. And the philosophy is simple. We are going to recognize the needs by talking, by getting close to people, understanding what their needs are, and centering the needs of people with everything that they do. In a human-centered approach, we have a deep belief that your mindset matters. And so in this, we adopted human-centered mindsets, which we'll get here to shortly. But we believe that your mindset matters. And it doesn't matter if you have the greatest SEL curriculum, the best intervention, if you're doing whatever it is, because if you don't have the right mindset, then it's not as likely to be successful. So in this human-centered approach, we believe that mindset matters. Now, in the strategy, and we kind of talked about these things, but I wanted to just be as succinct as possible in this slide. And the strategy of school redesign, it puts the needs of people first, and it's responsive. It recognizes the need and then works actively to meet the needs of people. It's grounded in equity by noticing and reflecting it, understanding how inequity has shown up, and then working actively to redesign those inequitable systems and creating more equitable systems. And it puts, again, the needs of school communities and peoples first through a lens of being asset-based. Now, these are the human-centered mindsets that we've adopted. And there's 7 of these human-centered mindsets, and I absolutely love them. We opened them up in team meetings. We always reviewed them, and we leaned into these mindsets, which are super important. And the first mindset that you see is empathy, but it's not the cheesy, like what you hear, like, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of others, which is important, right? We need to be able to take the perspective of others. But in this empathy, it's a deep desire to learn, to feel, to understand, to connect with other people. And you do that by ceding power, by asking questions, by listening deeply to understand the needs of other people. It's human-centered on a deeply emotional and relational level. It's optimistic in the sense that we believe that when we work collaboratively together, that we have all the resources, the ingenuity, the innovation that we need to be successful. We understand that in systems level change, it's complex work. It can feel difficult. It can feel overwhelming. And at times, because of that, it can be confusing. But when you have a human-centered mindset, we are embracing the unknown, embracing ambiguity, and understanding that we have all the tools and resources we need to work through it, and that we are going to make it solutions by testing it out, seeing what works, what doesn't work, but we're not going to be immobilized and paralyzed and not take action. This one is one of my favorite mindsets because how many of us have just sat in meeting after meeting after meeting and nothing gets done? Nothing ever happens. By making it, it's the belief that, hey, we got to get feedback, but we know that we need action now. By taking action, we're more likely to move towards a solution that works for our users. Importantly, we understand that when we make it, that we might not get it right the first time, but we view failure as a good thing in the context that we can learn from our failures, right? So often in education, failure is a bad thing, and we create spaces where it's you have to be successful, which by doing that, people don't want to take risk. People don't want to jump out there and take chances. No, we want to learn from failure and fail fast, because the faster that you can fail, the faster that you can move towards a solution that's innovative and works and actually move the needles. And with that, iterate, 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 right? We understand that version one is just version one, right? And that I'm getting it out there, getting feedback. We understand that we're going to constantly be evolving and changing and tweaking until we just get it right. But having the creative confidence to take a chance in doing something different, right? And shifting away from these antiquated approaches. And these were the mindsets that our team adopted as we worked diligently to do something that had never been done before in Southeast DC. And so this is our team right here. It was four of us that stepped out of our traditional roles and into this new redesigned team role. And right here in the bottom left was our director of school redesign, who oversaw the entire process. We had instructional teacher redesign coach, whose primary focus was looking at the best instructional practices and working with a team of teachers to see how can we redesign our instructional practices and curriculum. Importantly, we had in the upper right-hand corner a community redesign coach whose primary focus was getting invoice or getting the voices from community members, from community partners, from families and parents, making sure they had an active role in the school redesign. And then this guy here, who's just super energetic and pointing right at everyone. My role was the student redesign experience coach, and then I moved into the assistant director of redesign. My primary focus was just that, ensuring the voice of students and making sure that students had an active role in this process. Again, you all have access to the slides and handouts. In this, there's a link to where you hear directly from the students of what redesign meant to them. And I love the caption because it says redesign is about us, and us meaning the students. And one of the most powerful things that we did was amplify student voice and empower student agency so that they were active in every step of the way. And this was important because in this student-centered approach to the work, we had to make sure that people understood that for our school community, we had to adopt this quote. And Tim Brown, he's the CEO and president of IDEO. I would love to hear if anyone has gone through this training through IDEO around human-centered design work, which is amazing. And I believe it's the future of social emotional learning in the space of education and how we need to approach this work. But he says, it's not us versus them, or even us on behalf of them. For a design thinker, it has to be us with them. And this was the approach that we use. It's not us against them or us coming and being the saviors and knowing everything. No, as a design thinker, my primary role was stepping into this work and looking to learn, looking to ask the right questions of our students and young people to center their experience, to center their voices, to say, hey, you're closer to the problem. How can we find solutions that you think will work? And then co-creating and co-designing innovative solutions together that really move the needles. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds fluffy and fun and all of those things, but it actually was a very strategic way of thinking. What's fascinating about this, I talk about strengths all the time. And I try to take, I'll talk about some of the strength-based work here shortly, but I always try to identify my top 5 strengths. And they're mostly the same. But one that popped into my top 5 was strategic, which is not me at all. Typically, I'm maximizer, ideation, achiever, woo, like all the fun, fluffy, happy things, right? But because going through this process, thinking strategically became part of not just this process, but who I was as a person. And this redesign is a strategic way to go about systems level change, y'all, in a very strategic way. And so we always started with empathizing first, and that's understanding who are we working with and for, right? Is it students? Is it the community? Is it parents? We sought to understand what's important to our students, our community, our parents, and we sought to bring them in. By bringing them in, we can move towards defining, to understanding what the problem is. A reason why initiatives and interventions, SEL curriculums fail, because we get these 2 steps wrong. We don't ask our students what's important, what are the needs. We don't understand the context. We don't understand their unique challenges and perspectives. And importantly, we don't ask what they need, because we don't do those things in the context of SEL. You go to that CASEL website, to the CASEL guide, we select the SEL curriculum, we implement it, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we get it wrong. And then we sit around a room full of educators saying, I wonder why this didn't work. Oh, well, let's go back to find another $100,000 curriculum, implement it, and get it wrong. And never ask the people what they need. So in this human-centered approach, it's putting the needs of people first, bringing them to be problem solvers along the way. And then in a collaborative way, ideating together, coming up with solutions, understanding that, hey, we're just going to throw out as many ideas as possible with the belief that we will land on something that will work. In this ideation phase, again, one of my top 5 strengths is ideation. So this was one of my favorite stages. You're bringing people in every step of the way and allowing them to come up with ideas as well, which is super powerful. After that phase, you move into prototype, right? How can you start small with a possible solution and then testing it out, seeing what works, what doesn't work, then going back to those mindsets, you make it, you put it out there, and you come back to the table and you constantly iterate, and keeping this loop going. And this was the process that we followed. In addition to this process, we then put it into this more global context to do a better job of understanding the unique needs of people. And this was called the liberatory design process. And it added 2 additional elements, notice and reflect. And this was important to our work because we had to understand, we had to notice systems of oppression and power dynamics and the historical context, especially in a place like Southeast DC. We had to be able to notice and understand and reflect on our thoughts and actions and biases and understand how power dynamics were at play. We had to ask questions such as, how has racial discrimination, things such as redlining, plagued the Anacostia community? And how might those things impact our school community? We had to ask those tough questions, and we couldn't be experts in the room. We had to amplify and bring in people who have been impacted by things such as housing discrimination, racial discrimination, gun violence, crime, all of those things to get their perspective. And so being able to notice and reflect was a key tenet of this design process for our young people. Again, for the sake of time, we don't have enough time for me to show you all these videos, but you all have access to these links. One of the really cool things that we got to do to help us build empathy was to go on what's called an empathy tour. The empathy tour, we loaded up school leaders from the 2 schools that were being redesigned. We loaded up our central office leaders. We got on a bus and we took a tour around Southeast DC, which were the communities where both of these schools were being redesigned. And we went on this empathy tour. And the empathy tour is a way to get out, to see, to develop, to feel, to get a sense of what's happening, right? How often do we just, again, come up with solutions from the comfort of our nice buildings in our office without consulting with people? Well, this empathy tour puts you out front and center. Not only did we take a tour in this bus around Southeast DC, we actually stopped the bus and got out in the neighborhoods, in the apartment buildings, in the community, and we talked to people and we asked them questions. What would make you want to send your child to Anacostia High School or a Evalu8 High School? How have we not served you? How have we failed to meet your needs? And the responses that we got were so powerful. And so that's something that I encourage every school team, every leadership team to do. Other ways to build empathy are through empathy interviews and empathy immersion activities. Empathy interviews are where you bring in people, you have conversations to listen deeply to their needs. Again, and the empathy immersions are simply immersing yourself in the perspective of someone else. And I wanted to show you all just a quick example of an empathy interview. And this is a strategy that you all can use to build empathy literally today. All you need is sticky notes, a pen, and a clock app on your phone. Think about an issue that's important to you. As an example, an issue that was important to me was our discipline practices inside of our school. And so with our student redesign work, I brought in a group of students and I developed what was called a student design team. My student design team, it was, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into that, but we had an opportunity to bring in students from 9th through 12th grade and get their perspective on discipline practices and policies. In DC, our discipline policies are under Chapter 25. That's the name of our discipline policies. And we reviewed some of the different policies. And I got the perspective directly from our students around these practices and policies. And then we simply took sticky notes and we took a minute doing I like, I wish, I wonder. The way how this works, you write down one thing that you like about the sticky notes and then move that sticky note to the side. And you have 1 minute to write down as many things as you like, one thing per sticky note. You set a minute for I like. When the timer goes off, you move to I wish. What's something that you wish about this discipline policy? You set your timer for a minute and write down as many things that you wish. And then you repeat that for I wonder. After you go through that process, then it's a matter of just sorting themes and trends that you find. Once you're able to find themes and trends that might come up, then you work with that team. And as an example, some of the trends that we found is that overall, they liked that their safety was prioritized, but they felt that school was a prison and that they didn't belong. So based on those things, we came up with some creative solutions with the feedback of our students and young people. And this is a simple way that you can build empathy and learn about the needs of people. And we also did this process not just from the perspective of students, but also from the perspective of our school security, from our deans, and from our school leaders. Another awesome way to do this is through what's called a chat and shoot. I brought in food and then we sat and I listened to the needs of people. And this is what it looks like. We had a conference room. I brought in a bunch of food, some sandwiches, some vegan options, and we just talked about their experiences so that I could understand the student experience and also the security experience around discipline practices and policies. And then that empathy immersion, I actually immersed myself in the experience of our students, entering in and looking at what's happening through the lens of security, what's happening through the lens of our students. It's almost as if I were a fly on the wall and just immersing myself in what's going on. And then from there, you work to create innovative solutions as well. Now, that process of what I did was foundational to developing the student redesign team. And in the student redesign team, I trained a group of students around these human-centered design principles, where we did empathy interviews and observations and emergence. Um, we started by building empathy. I went around the school asking students, what brings you joy to be in this school? What are your needs? And we did surveys, we took qualitative data, but got out and asked, what is it that you need? And here are just some cool shots and images of what this looked like in action. After I got some initial feedback and perspective of students, then I worked to develop a team of students 9th through 12th grade across all ends of the spectrum, from students who were in AP honor classes to students who had emotional disabilities and were receiving special education services. We had a good diverse group of students who were tasked with providing feedback and being trained in this student-centered design thinking principles. Why? So that we could amplify the needs of young people in an authentic and very real way. A key tenet of what we did was listen deeply to the needs of people. And this is what I taught my students to do. And you can see in the bottom left picture, these are some of our students who were part of our student redesign team. And then we brought in our feeder schools as well. So we brought in our students from the middle school, we brought in our students from the elementary school, and we listened to their needs. We asked them, what would it take for you to come to Anacostia High School? What is it that you need? And we understood the needs of people. And we also got out of the school building and we went into the community. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is me and a good friend named Robert King. Robert King, he was formerly incarcerated in DC for a number of years. And I got connected with him as a way to really help our young people understand, that there's real consequences to actions, but also to bring in someone from the community who has seen it all, who's done it all. And we just built up a really good relationship. Our young people just really could connect, could relate, could understand. And so we went to YSC, which is a correctional facility in DC, and we listened deeply to the needs of our young people to understand, how have we failed them? How have we not met their needs? And then to really look at what can we do to design a more equitable system so that you can have access to opportunities to be successful. Then in the bottom right-hand corner is students from my redesign team, as well as students from Ballou High School. We all came together to have conversations about what we can do to meet the needs of young people across DC, across Southeast DC. And we brought in our council members and politicians, and this is our principal of our school, listening to the needs of our young people, which I think is powerful. I mean, these are just more pictures of some of this work in action and some of our feeder middle and elementary school as well. And these pictures are so powerful because, again, when you look at the statistics and you see our numbers, our enrollment steadily declining, to seeing our kids in school, engaged and active, this works, y'all, simply by recognizing and responding to the needs of people. Well, based off of building empathy and defining the problem and bringing people to the table, here's what we heard. 3 primary things: that students didn't feel wanted or cared for in school or in the community. They said that they had a poor sense of belonging, and our students wanted to feel more connected while they were at school. And in this student-centered design way of going about this work, we put forth how might we questions. These how might we questions are excellent ways to formulate a hypothesis that we can build innovative solutions around. And in this question, we ask the question, how might we, as a school and community, create an environment where students feel loved, cared for, and connected to the school community? And that was the question that, as the assistant director of redesign, I sought to answer for our young people. And based on that, we did a number of things. We created this concept called the Dream Team. And the Dream Team was training our staff in the strength based approach so that they can have the knowledge, the skills, and dispositions to work with young people. And this is based on feedback from our students, based on surveys and empathy interviews that our young people did, and saying that they wanted to feel connected, they wanted to feel loved. And we taught our staff principles grounded in positive psychology and in understanding social, emotional, and academic development, and understanding this student-centered way of going about the work. One of the key things that we did was teach our staff this strength-based approach of how to use their skills, of how to leverage the unique assets of people, and ultimately how to lead a meaningful life. And then based off of this work, we saw that there were many benefits of leaning into this strength-based approach because it's solution focused, it promoted academic achievement, and it empowered our staff and our young people to take direct control over their lives. Importantly, to make a real difference with our young people, I recognized that we had to get our staff to be able to lean into these principles first. So we helped our staff to name their strengths. And to do that, they took the Clifton Strength Finders assessment, which is a sensational assessment, a strength-based assessment that tells you your top 5 strengths. As an example, these were my top 5 strengths: maximizer, ideation, futuristic, focus, and achiever. And I try to take this every year. Interestingly, some of these will rotate in and out, but maximizer, ideation, and achiever are typically always in my top 3. And I had all of my staff take these assessments. If you're looking for the Clifton Strength Finder, there is a cost associated with it. So if you're looking for a free assessment, I recommend the Enneagram assessment, which is an awesome, awesome assessment. It provides 9 personality types. As an example, I'm a type 3. The type 3 is an achiever. And you see there's synergy between this and the Clifton Strength Finders, which also said I was an achiever as well. And type 3s are confident, focused, polished, and energetic. They can sometimes be too concerned with looking successful. And again, you'll have access to all of these slides. If you click the link, you can take this free Enneagram assessment so that you can begin naming your strengths as well. Then once you can name your strengths, I encourage you to write them down, list them, commit them to memory. It's one thing to be able to name your strengths, but then we took it a step further with knowing your strengths. And then with knowing your strengths, you have to be able to reflect on them. And to reflect on knowing your strengths, we held monthly strength-based workshops for our staff. And in these strength-based workshops, we reflected on questions such as, what are the earliest memories you have of your strengths? What has given you the most energy in your life? Who were you before the world told you who to be? And when, if ever, have your strengths gone dark and why? Now, these are deep, heavy questions, but we believe that in order for us to break those systems of oppression and perpetual historical trends of inequity, that we had to do the deep work first, starting with ourselves. And we had to approach it from a strength-based approach. And when we started to lean into these human-centered design principles and the strength-based approach, that we saw a shift happening with our staff. And I put this quote because this was an authentic moment that we caught after one of our workshops, to where 2 staff members who have been at odds, when we looked at it from a lens of, hey, I have unique strengths, you have unique strengths, how can we work collaboratively for our young people? Magic can happen. And this quote says, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And this is a new model. And as educators, how can we use our strengths, our energy to build something new, something innovative? And this is why it's important to not only be able to name your strengths, to know them, but you have to use them. You have to put them into action. And that's where this work took on just a powerful next step, which now that we had our staff trained in the strength-based approach and understanding social emotional development and understanding fundamental principles of design thinking, then we taught those skills to our young people. And this is our staff working with our young people to help them be able to identify and name their strengths as well, to help them set goals and to break those chains of oppression, because we believe that they didn't have to be tied to those, that we could move beyond that and actually make a difference in the work that we're doing for our young people. Another awesome assessment, again, if you don't want to pay, is the VIA, the Values of Action Character Strength. And I like this one because they have one for young people as well. And there's a link that you could take here as well, which is really, really awesome. We had to prioritize student sense of belonging in the work that we did. And to prioritize the student sense of belonging, we had monthly assemblies for our students. We'll call them the brotherhood, sisterhood assemblies. And you could go to whichever assembly that you identified with. But we brought in community members and organizers and politicians and council members and all these different people and entrepreneurs and creatives to build relationships and make connections so that our students could start developing a sense of belonging. We had breakfast with our young people. And it was just an awesome, awesome way to prioritize a sense of belonging. Importantly, we were able to center joy inside of our school. Why? Because we listened to our young people and they said that we don't have joy here. We don't feel like we belong. So we went about creating physically and psychologically safe spaces. The way that we did this was by a simple way, creating a peace room. And in this peace room, it was something as simple as taking a room. Like I said, our attendance was dropping, so we had empty classrooms. And so we took one of those empty classrooms and brought in nice seating, low lighting, plants, and we did yoga and mindfulness and restorative circles inside that space. But it created a psychologically and physically safe space for our young people. We prioritize having events where our young people felt involved and connected and brought excitement and positive energy inside of these spaces as well. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we had instructional culture redesign. Well, her focus was on centering student learning and how can we bring student voice into the learning process. And so we shifted from our traditional antiquated approach to a project-based learning approach, which brought in hands-on activities and learning that our students just absolutely thrive with. And by doing these things, we prioritize student agency in everything that we did. And our students felt like, hey, this is a place where I have input, where I'm valued, and where I matter. And by doing these things, by adopting the student-centered approach to this work, here's what we found. And keep in mind, we were statistically last across every category when the ESSA star ratings came out back in 2018. Based on this redesign work, by recognizing and responding to the needs of our young people, by elevating their needs, by understanding their strengths, this is what we found. 89%, and this is data that comes from Panorama Culture and Climate Survey. We saw that 89% of students' sense of belonging increased, and this is just since the last time they took it from fall 21. That's an increase of 31%, which is absolutely sensational. We understood that students didn't feel like they belonged. We put measures in place to increase it, and then we saw those numbers skyrocket. We see that 89% of our students felt loved, an increase of 26% since the fall of 21. we saw that 96% of our students reported feeling challenged, an increase of 15% since the fall of 21. 91% of our students felt prepared, and then 85%. Was our greatest increase of 35% since fall of 21. 85% of our students reported feeling loved, challenged, and prepared based on listening to the needs, recognizing and responding to those needs. And one of the stats that I'm the most proud of, especially because we had the worst promotion rate in the district. 87% of our ninth graders promoted to the 10th grade, which was the highest promotion rate ever in our school. And I wanted to close with 3 points for you all. I know we talked about a lot of different things in a very short amount of time, but at a fundamental level, we have to listen deeply to people, y'all. That's what it means to be student-centered. That's what it means to be human-centered. Putting the needs of people first. Listening to the needs of people, y'all. Recognize what those needs are and respond to those needs. It's not that deep. It's not that complex or complicated. We can recognize what the needs are, respond to them, then we're on the right track. And that's what I've tried to do in everything that I've done in the space of education. We also have to understand that if we believe that there's inequities that exist, we gotta say, hey, how can we co-create and co-design equitable solutions so that we can break away from those inequitable outcomes and make sure that our students have access and have opportunities to be successful. And one thing that I don't think we talk about enough, we have to be in the space of prioritizing both student and staff sense of belonging, and I love this, SEL practices over curriculums, y'all. And what are the day-to-day practices that you're engaging in inside of your school community? And I want to close with this final thought. Fail often so you can succeed sooner. That was a key tenet of our work. And this just goes to say, we gotta move to action. And thank you for your time. Thank you for tuning in to this session. A lot of these things that I discussed, I'm excited to have a book coming out in the fall called Hacking Deficit Thinking. You can follow the Hacking Deficit Thinking across all social media at Hacking Deficits. I'm on Twitter, super engaged on Twitter, so please follow me on Twitter at School Psych Life. If you're on Instagram, I'm bmcclure6 on Instagram. There's someone else who has the School Psych Life theme on Instagram. That's School Psych Life on Twitter, bmcclure6 on Instagram. And if you have questions, if you have comments, if anything, if you just want to stay connected, I love engaging and having conversations and learning from you all as well. And here's my email, but let's definitely stay in touch and stay connected. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. McClure, for that amazing presentation. I think the content really resonated based on some of the comments I'm seeing coming through with our participants. We have one that says, I want more time with Dr. McClure, so I'm going to take the opportunity to plug our interactive Zoom session tomorrow with Dr. McClure. Bring your questions, go deeper on this topic. Take advantage of having access to this amazing content and innovator, thought leader in the field. So we're going to drop in the chat the link to register for that session tomorrow. And if we didn't get your question answered, we will take the opportunity tomorrow to get some of those answers for you. Thank you so much again for your participation in our first ever clinical conference, and we are excited to get started with our second session. So just give us a brief moment to get everything situated for our next speaker. And thank you again, Dr. McClure.